Hey mister, you have sold more than 125 million records, won a Nobel Prize in literature, and written hundreds of songs that speak to the feelings of many generations. Bob Dylan is known as a modern music legend, but not many people would have thought that someone who used to be a part of the counterculture movement would make such a big change in their faith. And after years of not saying anything, Dylan has finally told us why he chose that controversial path. Bob Dylan was born on May 24th, 1941, in Duluth, Minnesota, to a Jewish family who came from Eastern Europe. Robert Allen Zimmerman was his birth name. Abram Zimmerman and Beatrice Batty Stone were his parents. They were part of a small Jewish community in the American Midwest that kept strong religious and cultural traditions. The family moved to Hibbing when Dylan was 6, and he spent most of his youth there. He finished his bar mitzvah there in 1954, which meant he was officially an adult in the Jewish faith. These rites were an important aspect of Jewish religious life, and Dylan once lived in that place with a lot of respect. But Hibbing, with its severe weather and sleepy mining town feel, wasn't the best place for someone who wanted to start expressing themselves via art. Robert first heard music on the radio in the family's little living room. The Grand Ole Opry played country songs, Hank Williams' haunting voice, and Elvis Presley's loud voice. All of them were important to Dylan's early musical development. The blues of Muddy Waters and the R&B of Little Richard, in particular, helped him develop a wide range of musical tastes from a young age. Dylan started a band called the Golden Chords while he was in high school. They generally played high-energy rock and roll songs. The principal had to stop their performance once because it was too loud for school. After he graduated, he went to the University of Minnesota in 1959, where he learned even more about politics and culture. Dylan learned more about folk music, notably protest songs and American folk traditions, in the Dinkytown district of Minneapolis, which is the center for arts and young intellectuals. There, he found a new hero in Woody Guthrie, a folk musician who utilized music to make the world a better place. Dylan not only listened to Guthrie's songs, but also learned them by heart and sang them. He changed his name to Bob Dylan after the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas because he was so intrigued by ideas of freedom. Years later, he said in an interview, "You're born with the wrong name, so you give yourself the right one." The years 1960 to 1961 were a time of great change for Dylan. He went from Minneapolis to New York to see Woody Guthrie, who was in the hospital at the time. This event linked him to the growing folk music scene, which set the stage for his future career. Dylan grew up in a Jewish family, yet he started to move away from Orthodox religious beliefs. He didn't give up his faith, but with time he became more interested in exploring spirituality through music and philosophy of life. Dylan claimed in a 1997 interview with Newsweek, "I didn't find religion in the rabbis. I found it in the music." Even though he stopped following conventional Judaism, he was still religious. Researchers have shown that between 1961 and 1978, he included about 90 biblical references in his songs, with almost half of them coming from the Old Testament and half from the New Testament. This shows that Dylan thought of music as his own religious language from a young age. That fundamental foundation set the scenario for an unanticipated change, a moment that will change his whole artistic life because of a simple thing tossed on stage: putting faith behind fame. Columbia Records published his first album, Bob Dylan, in 1962. It was mostly made up of folk and blues covers, but it was the first step toward a career that would last for almost 7 decades. Bob Dylan's 1963 song, "Freewheeling," was the first time his name really had a national impact. Dylan swiftly became the unofficial voice of a generation looking for answers during times of war, social upheaval, and human rights violations. His songs "Blowing in the Wind" and "A Hard Rain's Ain't Gonna Fall" were popular. What made Dylan different was how he used lyrics as a weapon. There was symbolism, philosophy, and significant social criticism in every line. Things are shifting. In 1964, he became even more well-known as a protest singer who bravely spoke out against unfairness. But not many people knew that Dylan was hiding a big part of himself, a spiritual faith that was different from the ideas he sang about. Scott Marshall's book, Bob Dylan, A Spiritual Life, says that between 1961 and 1978, at least 89 of Dylan's 246 songs or public pronouncements mention the Bible. This is a number that is too high to be a coincidence. God said, "Abraham, kill me a son," is one of the lines of Highway 61 Revisited, or "You don't need a weatherman to tell you which direction the wind is blowing." In Subterranean Homesick Blues, there are layers of theology that go well beyond the social messaging. Even nevertheless, Dylan preferred not to talk about how faith affected his music. His career was taking off at this time, and he knew that saying anything about his personal beliefs may hurt his career in an industry that valued defiance over spiritual surrender. Dylan got a lot of hate from the same people who used to love him when he switched from folk to rock in the middle of the 1960s. His 1965 performance at the Newport Folk Festival, when he played electric guitar for the first time, caused a lot of talk. But Dylan kept going. He put out Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited, which helped start the folk rock genre. With Like a Rolling Stone, he broke every radio rule at the time by releasing a song that was more than 6 minutes long. This song would subsequently be rated #1 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Even though his job was going great, he couldn't stop the spiritual anguish that was slowly building inside him. A bad motorbike accident in the late 1960s kept Dylan from being around people for a long time. He put out John Wesley Harding 1967 during this time. The album included traditional folk characteristics and lyrics that were heavily based on the Bible, but he never officially announced it. Jimi Hendrix later notably covered All Along the Watchtower. He began with the picture of a prophet and a watchman, two types of people that are well known from the books of Isaiah and Ezekiel. Dylan shocked fans again with Blood on the Tracks in 1975, a very personal musical manifesto that nonetheless had spiritual and meditative tones. This was after he got back together with the band for Planet Waves. In Shelter from the Storm, he used the lady as a symbol of hope in a harsh world where death is around and men are battling to stay warm. "Come in," she said. "I'll provide you a place to stay out of the storm." People on the outside called Bob Dylan the voice of the counterculture, but on the inside, he was still far away from that image. His complicated relationship with Johnny Cash, a contemporary who was very Christian, showed how he was torn between two things. In a lot of private talks, Cash was worried that Dylan was too focused on art and didn't have a strong moral base. Both men were rebellious and went against what society expected of them, but Cash was a staunch Christian, while Dylan's lyrics were mostly about his own convictions. Dylan never believed in God. He always thought there was a metaphysical force behind things, as he explained in an interview in 1997. But he thought he had to hide the facts to protect his job and power. It wasn't until a bad night in the late 1970s that everything he had been hiding came out and could never be put back together. The time of change. Bob Dylan embarked on a world tour in November 1978 to promote the album Street Legal. The tour had a big band, fancy sets, and a distinct change in the way he performed. But behind the scenes, Dylan was really tired, both mentally and physically. After 11 years of marriage to Sarah Lowndes, they had to break it since they couldn't agree on anything. This left him with an emotional hole that was hard to fill. While bowing to thank the audience at a concert in San Diego, a little object flew from the crowd and landed at his feet. It was a cross made of silver. Dylan typically didn't pay attention to things thrown on stage, but this time he bent down, scooped it up, and put it in his coat pocket. Later, in Arizona, the next destination on the tour, he took out the cross and felt something strange. He later said that he received a true visit from Jesus one night at a hotel in Tucson. Dylan talked about the time I felt a presence that could only be Jesus in a rare interview with the Independent magazine. Jesus touched me. This was the first time an artist who had hitherto avoided making public theological statements acknowledged an occurrence of heavenly revelation. He said, "I felt it all over me. The glory of the Lord knocked me down and picked me up." After this, Dylan signed up for an adult Bible study program at the Association of Vineyard Churches in California. This was a branch of evangelical Christianity that was very popular in the West Coast artistic community at the time. Dylan went through what would later be called his born-again Christian period during the next 3 years. This was a whole new chapter in his life and career. Not only did his view of the world change, but he also changed all of his music to gospel themes. Slow Train Coming, which came out in August 1979, was the boldest statement of faith Dylan had ever made. In the opening track, "Got to Serve Somebody," he stated, "You may be an ambassador to England or France. You might like to gamble. You might like to dance. But you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord." The song reached number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned Dylan a Grammy for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance. The album was produced by Jerry Wexler, a renowned producer and a Jew who agreed to produce a Christian album because Dylan was so resolute. He didn't stop there. He went on to release Save 1980 and Shot of Love 1981, completing a controversial gospel trilogy. Among them, the song Every Grain of Sand is considered by many critics to be one of the most beautiful spiritual songs ever written in the 20th century. During this period, Dylan refused to perform his earlier hits, playing only gospel music throughout his tours, a decision that shocked and openly disappointed many fans. Bob Dylan's spiritual transformation did not happen quietly. When he stepped onto the stage with a new faith and refused to sing the songs that had made him a legend, a wave of backlash quickly followed. From fans who once praised him as the voice of a generation, to peers in the music industry and the press, many were stunned by the sight of Dylan now preaching Christianity through every lyric. The storm after conversion, the promotional tours for Slow Train, Coming and Save featured only songs with religious content. These were calls to faith, such as, "You gotta serve somebody," and "Pressing On." Many fans felt betrayed. At several shows, audience members held up signs reading, "Jesus loves your old songs." Some walked out midway through the performance, while others threw objects onto the stage in protest. The San Francisco Chronicle remarked that Dylan was now writing the most uninspired, unimaginative gospel songs of his entire career. Keith Richards, guitarist of the Rolling Stones, openly mocked Dylan's no longer a prophet. He's a preacher for profit. Meanwhile, John Lennon publicly ridiculed Dylan through his song, Serve Yourself, a direct rebuttal to the message of got to serve somebody. Lennon called the original cheap preaching, insisting that everyone should serve only themselves. It wasn't just fellow artists offering criticism. Secular and atheist activists also voiced disapproval. Madalyn Murray O'Hair, known for her campaign to ban mandatory school prayer in the U.S., publicly accused Dylan of being a born-again trend follower. Another man, dressed in white and holding a cross, stood in silent protest outside the theater where Dylan performed, symbolizing a counterstatement. Despite everything, Bob Dylan did not back down. During a concert in Toronto, he told the crowd, "I don't care if you don't like what I sing. I'm following Jesus and he's the only audience I need." That stance wasn't just defensive. It was a declaration he wasn't changing to be liked. He changed because he believed, though, he would later step away from the image of a gospel missionary. Dylan never abandoned his new faith. In a 1984 conversation with Rolling Stone, he dismissed the idea that he had been converted by the media, stating that the term born again was a lazy label. And during a 2004 appearance on 60 Minutes, he once again affirmed his connection to faith. The only person you need to think twice before lying to is yourself or God, not just through words. Dylan expressed his beliefs through actions. In 1989 and 1991, he participated in charitable events held by Chabad Lubavitch, an Orthodox Jewish organization. In 1997, he performed for Pope John Paul II at the World Eucharistic Congress in Bologna, Italy, a moment that surprised tens of thousands when he sang Knocking on Heaven's Door in front of the pontiff. When questioned about the apparent contradiction between Judaism and Christianity in his personal life, Dylan never offered a direct answer, but researchers like Scott Marshall assert that he reconciled both. Dylan continued reading the Bible, lighting candles in church, and in a 2022 interview with the Wall Street Journal, he declared, "I believe in damnation, salvation, and predestination. The 5 books of Moses, Paul's letters, the calling of saints, and so forth." Bob Dylan never sought to make anyone believe what he accomplished, even though he got a lot of criticism. He just kept writing, playing, and letting his music speak for itself. For Dylan, no lecture was more convincing than a song composed from real faith and spiritual heritage after decades. Dylan's influence grew beyond music all the time. His memoir, Chronicles Volume 1, came out in 2004 and instantly became a New York Times bestseller. In 2016, he became the first artist to win the Nobel Prize in Literature for inventing new poetic forms within the great American song tradition. The Swedish Academy said at the awards event that his songs are a type of poetry that millions of people share. That year, Dylan didn't go in person, but he did send a taped speech in which he said that reading Homer and the Bible had a big impact on all of his writing. Dylan stayed quite busy from 2020 till 2025. Rough and Rowdy Ways, which was out in 2020, was the #1 album in the UK and was praised by critics as a fully grown effort. The tour that went with it started in 2021 and lasted until September 2025. It included dozens of US gun dates as part of the Outlaw Music Festival with Willie Nelson. Dylan still performed regularly at 84, showing no symptoms of artistic degeneration. He put out the 1974 live recordings in 2024. This 27-disc set has 417 tracks. He also sang on the movie Reagan's song, Don't Fence Me In. The biographical movie A Complete Unknown, directed by James Mangold, came out that same year. It tells the story of Dylan's trip from Minnesota to New York in the early 1960s. The movie is supposed to show how he changed as an artist and as a person in a real way. You can't ignore how much of an effect bootleg series Volca 13 Trouble No More has. 2017 saw the release of an 8-CD box set including 14 songs that had never been published before from 1979 to 1981. This collection gives us a clear picture of how Dylan was feeling during a moment of intense criticism and shows that his faith has always been strong through unreleased songs and drafts. The Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa put together a companion book called Mixing Up the Medicine. It also shows that religious themes were in Dylan's notebooks as early as the 1950s, long before he became famous. Dylan told the Wall Street Journal in 2002 that he read the Bible regularly, meditated, prayed, and lit candles in church. He also added that music is still the most important part of his faith. "I don't have faith in preachers or missionaries. I believe in music." Bob Dylan's impact in 2025 goes beyond prizes and financial success. He has sold over 125 million recordings, won 10 Grammy Prizes, an Oscar, a Nobel Prize in Literature, and written thousands of spiritually meaningful songs. Dylan is known as a unique artist who has transformed his spiritual journey into living art. there is no one faith that can entirely characterize him. Dylan is a traveler with a guitar in one hand and the Bible on his mind as he moves through time. Share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you think this trip was worth remembering. We have a lot more stories to tell that are unlike any other.